Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranoid Stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching, so YouTube will keep showing you stories like this. Now, let's begin. My name's Noah Quinn. I'm 25, work part-time at a climbing gym while I finish my geology degree. I've been caving for about 3 years now, nothing extreme, mostly training runs in documented systems. 2 weeks ago, my friend Marcus and I went to map a small cave network that had opened up after some heavy rains outside Chattanooga. Minor system, supposed to be an easy day trip, good for practicing our survey techniques. We were maybe 40 minutes in when Marcus slipped on some loose scree. Not a big fall, maybe 5 feet, but he landed badly. His ankle swelled up immediately, turned this angry purple color. He couldn't put weight on it. I helped him sit against the cave wall, gave him water, checked my phone. No signal, obviously. We'd passed the last marked junction about 10 minutes back. I told him I'd hike out, get help, be back in an hour tops. He nodded, tried to smile. I left him my backup light and headed toward the entrance. That's when I took the wrong turn. I don't know how I missed it. I've got a good sense of direction underground, always have. But somehow I ended up in a passage I didn't recognize. The ceiling dropped lower and the walls were different. They weren't the usual limestone. They were covered in this dried mud, cracked into thousands of irregular patterns. It looked old, really old, and when I touched it, the texture was all wrong. Soft in some places, brittle in others, like touching something that had been skin once. I turned around to backtrack, but my headlamp flickered, just for a second. When the light steadied, I saw something in the shadows behind me, a shape that looked almost human, tall, elongated. I spun fully around and it was gone. Just empty tunnel. My breathing got faster. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, my mind playing games because I was stressed about Marcus. I kept moving, trying to retrace my steps, but every turn led to more of those mud-covered walls, more of that skin-like texture. The air got warmer. That's what really started to bother me. Caves are supposed to maintain a constant temperature, usually cool. But this felt like body heat, like I'd walked into something's mouth. And there was a smell, sharp, electric, like the air right before lightning strikes. I stopped at a wider chamber to check my map, tried to orient myself. That's when my light flickered again, and in that brief darkness I felt something. Not heard, felt. Movement behind me, the kind of presence you sense when someone's standing too close in a crowded room. I turned fast, and for just a moment, maybe half a second, my headlamp caught something in the periphery. A figure. Human-shaped, but wrong in ways I can't quite articulate. The proportions were off. Too tall, arms too long, head tilted at an angle that made my stomach drop. Then it was gone. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably 30 seconds. My heart was doing this weird stutter thing in my chest. I forced myself to keep moving, told myself I was seeing things, that the stress and the confined space were getting to me. But it kept happening. Every time I turned, every time the light shifted, I'd catch these figures in the shadows. Never directly in the beam, always just at the edge where the light weakened and bent. And here's what made me understand something was fundamentally wrong. The figures didn't match my movements. When I raised my arm, the shadow didn't. When I crouched down, it stayed upright. These weren't my shadows. They were something else's. I started moving faster, not quite running, but close. The passages all looked the same now, all covered in that dried mud with its horrible texture. I scraped my hand against it once, and the sound it made, I can still hear it, like dragging fingernails across dried leather. Then I noticed the mud was warmer than the rock underneath, noticeably warmer. I pressed my palm flat against a section of wall and jerked back immediately. It had given slightly under pressure, yielding, like pressing into something with muscle beneath it. Look, I know how this sounds. I'm a geology student. I understand cave formations. I know about pareidolia and how the mind creates patterns in chaos. But this wasn't that. The walls were moving, subtle, almost imperceptible, but definitely moving, breathing. My headlamp flickered again, longer this time, maybe 3 seconds of darkness, and in that blackness I heard something. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of sound shaping itself into almost words. I don't know how else to explain it, but I felt language pressing against my ears without actually hearing anything. When the light came back, there were more figures. 4, maybe 5 of them, scattered in the shadows around the chamber I'd stumbled into, all facing me, all perfectly still. All. I did the only thing I could think of. I closed my eyes and kept my light pointed straight ahead, and I started walking. I kept my eyes shut and moved by feel, one hand trailing the wall, the other holding my headlamp steady. I don't know why I thought this would help. Some instinct told me not to look, not to let my light shift and create those indirect shadows where the figures could form. I walked blind for I don't know how long. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been 30. My hand kept touching that wrong mud-skin texture, kept feeling that awful warmth. Twice I felt the wall pulse slightly, like something breathing beneath it. Eventually my hand found cooler stone, real limestone. I opened my eyes, and I was back in the mapped section. I recognized the formations. I could see the spray-painted survey markers. I found the exit in another 20 minutes. The sunlight felt wrong somehow, too bright, too clean. I called rescue services, gave them Marcus's location. They brought him out an hour later. His ankle was broken, but he was fine otherwise. He said I'd been gone almost 4 hours. That was 2 weeks ago. Marcus is recovering. He wants to go back caving once his ankle heals. He thinks it's funny I got lost in such a minor system. I haven't told him what I saw. I haven't told anyone until now. I've been doing architectural restoration for 15 years, and I'm pretty practical about things. Old buildings creak, shadows play tricks, you learn not to jump at every noise. But what happened on that drive through eastern Kentucky last month, I still can't make sense of it. I was heading to assess a manor house outside Pikeville, one of those jobs where the owner's barely holding on to the property and wants to know if it's worth saving. The GPS gave me 2 route options, the interstate loop that added an hour or a mountain pass that cut straight through. I took the shortcut. It was late afternoon, golden light coming through the trees, and the road was one of those barely maintained county routes where you might see another car every 20 minutes. About 40 minutes in, the road curved along a ridge, and I saw it on the left side, this farmstead that looked like it had been rotting there for decades. The house was gray, almost the same color as the surrounding woods, like it was trying to disappear. The porch sagged in the middle, and most of the windows were either broken or boarded over. What caught my attention, though, was the figure sitting in a chair on that porch, just sitting there, perfectly still, facing the road. I only had a few seconds as I drove past, but the image stuck with me. Someone in dark clothes, hands on the armrests, head turned toward the road, toward my truck. The weird part was how motionless they were. Not rocking in the chair, not shifting position, just staring. I remember thinking it was probably some old-timer who sat out there every day watching the occasional car go by. Lonely, maybe. I've seen stranger things in rural areas. The job in Pikeville took longer than expected. The foundation was worse than the owner thought, and I had to do a full structural assessment. By the time I finished the next day, it was already 3 p.m, and I wanted to get back before dark. I pulled up the GPS and saw the same 2 options, but this time I chose the interstate loop. Different route entirely, about 100 miles south of where I'd been the day before. The interstate was fine for the first hour. Then I had to exit onto a state highway that wound through the mountains. The sun was getting low, that orange light that makes everything look a little unreal. I was thinking about the manor house, whether the owner would actually invest in the repairs, when I came around a bend and saw it. The same farmstead, on the right side of the road this time. My foot came off the gas without me thinking about it. The truck slowed as I stared at that sagging porch, the gray wood, the boarded windows, and the figure. Same chair, same position, hands on the armrests, head turned toward the road, toward me. I want to be clear. I wasn't on the same road. I'd checked the GPS twice before getting on the interstate. This highway was a completely different route, miles away from yesterday's mountain pass. But there it was, unmistakable. The same dying tree behind the house, the same collapsed section of roof on the right side, the same chair. I didn't stop. My hands tightened on the steering wheel and I accelerated past it, watching it disappear in my side mirror. My chest felt tight, and I had this sudden irrational urge to check the back seat even though I knew I was alone. When I got to a gas station 20 minutes later, I pulled over and just sat there with the engine running. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe there were 2 old farmsteads that looked similar. Maybe my memory was playing tricks after 2 long days of driving. But I knew what I'd seen. The tree, the roof, the chair, the figure. I got out my phone and looked at the route I'd taken the day before, then the one I'd just driven. They didn't intersect. They weren't even close. One was northeast of Pikeville. The other was almost due south. You'd have to deliberately drive in a massive loop to connect them. And even then, there was no logical way the same property could be visible from both roads. I kept driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I passed a side road or a driveway, I found myself checking to see if that gray house was there, if that figure was sitting in the dark, tracking my movement. When I finally got back to my apartment in Lexington around midnight, I went straight to Google Maps. I spent 2 hours zooming in on satellite view, following both routes, looking for that farmstead. I found old properties, abandoned barns, plenty of rural decay, but nothing that matched, nothing with that specific configuration, the house, the tree, the collapsed roof section. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. The figure was closer the second time. The first day, the house sat maybe 30 feet back from the road. The second day, it was right there, almost at the shoulder, like it had moved forward, like it was waiting for me to come around that bend. I know how this sounds. I know what the rational explanation should be. Coincidence, fatigue, 2 similar-looking places. But I measured the distance between those 2 roads. Over 100 miles of mountain terrain. No structure could exist in 2 places at once. No person could know which route I'd take and position themselves there ahead of time, unless they weren't trying to follow me. Unless they were always there, wherever I was going to be. Waiting. I haven't taken any jobs in eastern Kentucky since then. When clients call from that area, I refer them to other restorers. I tell them I'm booked up, that my schedule's full. They don't need to know that I wake up some nights with the image of that figure burned into my mind, sitting perfectly still, hands on the armrests, head turned toward the road. Last week I got a call about a property in West Virginia right on the Kentucky border. Good money, interesting project. I almost said yes, but then I thought about what roads I'd have to take to get there, and I felt that tightness in my chest again. I turned it down. The client seemed confused. I could hear it in his voice when I gave him some excuse about prior commitments. He probably thinks I'm unprofessional. That's fine, because the alternative is driving through those mountains again and seeing that farmstead for a third time, even closer to the road. Seeing that figure lean forward in the chair, finally ready to stand. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it chose me, but I know enough to stop going where it can find me. I'm a wildlife photographer. I've spent hundreds of nights alone in the woods, and I've never been particularly superstitious about it. Bears, coyotes, the occasional curious bobcat, those things don't bother me. I know how to read animal behavior. I know what belongs out there. 3 weeks ago, I was on assignment in the Monongahela National Forest. Magazine wanted shots of nocturnal wildlife. Deer, maybe a black bear if I got lucky. Standard job. I set up camp in a clearing about 2 miles off the main trail. Decent visibility, close to a game path. Perfect spot. First night was quiet. I set up my camera trap around dusk. Motion-activated trail cam pointing at the clearing's edge where I'd scattered some bait corn. Basic setup. The camera records in infrared, timestamps everything. I'd done this exact thing maybe 50 times before. Second day I spent hiking, taking landscape shots, checking some natural springs for animal activity. When I got back to camp around 4, I noticed my headlamp was missing from my pack. I always keep it in the same pocket. Always. I tore through my gear twice. Gone. I figured maybe I'd left it at one of the springs, but that didn't make sense. I remembered using it the night before to read before bed. I had a backup flashlight, so I let it go. Annoying, but not a crisis. That evening, I decided to review the camera trap footage while I ate dinner. I was expecting the usual. Raccoons, maybe a fox, hopefully something more interesting. I had about 8 hours of recording from the previous night. The first 3 hours were nothing. Just static frames of the empty clearing, the occasional moth passing through. Then around 2:47 in the morning, the motion sensor triggered. It wasn't an animal. A figure appeared at the edge of the frame. Tall, maybe 6.5 feet. Human-shaped, but the proportions were wrong somehow. Too thin through the torso, arms hanging slightly too long. It was standing just outside the reach of my camp's perimeter light, right at that boundary where the infrared struggled to get detail. It just stood there. I kept watching, waiting for it to move, to do something that would explain what I was seeing. A person, maybe. Lost hiker, confused, disoriented. But it didn't move like someone lost. It was completely still. Head tilted slightly to one side, angled toward my tent. The timestamp rolled forward. 2:48, 2:49, 2:50. Still standing there. Not swaying. Not shifting weight, not moving at all. At 2:53, it took one step forward, slow, deliberate, then stopped again. This position was clearer in the infrared. I could see it was holding something in its right hand, down by its side. Something small, cylindrical. My headlamp. I paused the footage. My hands were shaking badly enough that I fumbled the camera. The thing in the video was holding my headlamp, the one I'd noticed missing maybe 3 hours ago, which meant it had been in my camp. While I was there, while I was sleeping, I forced myself to keep watching. At 3:12, it took another step, then another, closer to my tent. The motion was wrong, no hip movement, no natural walking rhythm, just forward motion like something on a track. It stopped about 15 feet from my tent. Well within the light now, though the infrared washed out finer details. I could see it was wearing dark clothing, or maybe the skin itself was just that dark. No visible face, just a pale oval where the head should be. The head was definitely tilted, ear angled down toward the tent, listening. It stood like that for 43 minutes. I know because I watched the timestamp the entire time, barely breathing. Just standing there, holding my headlamp, listening to me sleep. At 3:55, it turned, smooth, mechanical, and walked back out of frame the same way it had come. Not hurried, not cautious, just done. The recording continued for another 4 hours. Nothing else triggered the motion sensor. I sat there with the camera in my lap as the sky outside my tent went from dusk to dark. I should have packed up right then, hiked out by flashlight, to hell with the assignment. But here's the thing. I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe someone was screwing with me. Maybe it was a person in weird clothing, some local who gets off on freaking out campers. The headlamp thing, though, that didn't fit. How would they have gotten it without waking me? My tent doesn't have a vestibule. Everything was inside with me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up with my knife and my backup flashlight waiting for the motion sensor to ping again. It didn't. Morning came. I packed my gear in under 20 minutes, hands still shaky. When I checked the camera trap, I noticed something I'd missed the night before. There was a second clip, recorded at 4:17 in the morning. After the figure had left the frame, it had come back. This time it was closer, maybe 8 feet from my tent, still holding the headlamp, but now the head was tilted the other way, like it was examining something from a different angle. This clip was only 4 minutes long. At the end, it set the headlamp down on the ground, stood upright, and walked away. I found the headlamp exactly where the video showed it would be. Sitting in the grass, lens down, right where the clearing met the tree line. I hiked out that morning, told the magazine I got sick, couldn't finish the assignment. They weren't happy, but they paid me for the 2 days. I still have the footage. I've watched it maybe a dozen times, trying to see something I missed. Trying to find the explanation that makes it make sense. The way it moved, the way it just stood there, listening. The fact that it came back after I'd presumably gone back to sleep. I keep thinking about the tilt of its head, that patient, focused angle, like it was studying me, learning something. I haven't been back to Monongahela. Haven't taken another solo camping assignment. My editor keeps asking when I'll be ready to go out again, and I keep putting her off. I'm a long-haul trucker. Been doing this for 12 years. I've driven through every kind of weather, every kind of terrain, and I've seen some weird stuff on the road. Mostly just tired drivers doing stupid things. But what happened in that truck stop outside Gatlinburg last February, that's different. That's something I still can't explain. The blizzard hit hard and fast. 1 minute I was making good time on I-40. The next I couldn't see 10 feet in front of my rig. Highway patrol closed the interstate, and I barely made it off at this exit I'd never noticed before. The GPS called it Ridgeway, but there were no signs. Just this narrow road winding up into the mountains, and at the top, a truck stop that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. The parking lot was nearly empty. 2 other semis, both dark and quiet like their drivers were already asleep. The main building was this low concrete structure with those old yellow sodium lights that make everything look sick. Half of them were out. I parked and sat there for a minute, watching the snow pile up on my windshield, trying to decide if I should just sleep in the cab. But I'd been driving for 9 hours straight, and I needed coffee, needed to stretch my legs. The truck stop had a diner attached, but through the windows I could see it was closed, chairs up on tables, no lights except for one flickering fluorescent in the back. There was supposed to be a town just past the truck stop. I could see a few street lights through the snow, maybe a quarter mile up the road. I figured there had to be something open, a gas station, a bar, anything. I'm not the type who gets nervous easily, for context. You drive alone for 12 years, you get comfortable with empty places. But walking up that road, I felt off. The snow was coming down so thick I could barely see, and the wind had this quality to it, not howling, but humming, like it was passing through something hollow. The town was smaller than I expected, maybe a dozen buildings, all dark except for one street light at the intersection. Everything looked closed, abandoned almost. But then I saw a light in a window ahead, looked like a pharmacy or general store. I headed toward it. That's when I first saw him. I was passing this old hardware store, its windows grimy and dark, when I caught movement in the reflection. A figure standing behind me, maybe 10 feet back, wearing a long coat, one of those old-fashioned overcoats, the kind with a wide collar. I could see him clearly in the glass, clear enough to notice he wasn't moving with me. He was just standing there. I turned around fast. Nothing. Just snow and empty street. I stood there for a second, my breath fogging in the cold. Told myself it was my own reflection I'd seen, distorted by the dirty glass. But I knew what I looked like in my work jacket and ball cap, and that wasn't it. Still, I kept walking. The store ahead was closed too. The light I'd seen was just a security lamp inside. But as I got closer, I saw him again, this time in the store's front window. Same figure, same coat, standing in the same position relative to me, maybe 10 feet behind. I didn't turn around this time. I kept my eyes on the reflection and took a step forward. He didn't move. I took another step, still nothing. He was fixed in place, like he was painted on the glass. My hands started shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. I walked faster, past the store, and caught my reflection in a parked car's window. He was there too. Same distance, same position. Even though the car was facing a completely different direction, even though the angle was all wrong, there he was, standing behind me in that coat. Look, I know how this sounds, but I'm telling you what I saw. I started checking every reflective surface I passed. A puddle of slush. There he was, standing in it like the water was a window, a metal newspaper box, his shape distorted but unmistakable in the curved surface. A dark store window that should have shown nothing but blackness. He was clearer in that one than in any of the others. Here's the thing that made my stomach drop. One of those windows I looked into was facing a brick wall. No space behind me. No way for anyone to actually be standing there. But in the reflection, behind me, there he was. Same position, same coat. I finally turned around in the middle of the street and shouted. I don't even remember what I said. Something stupid, probably. The snow swallowed my voice and gave back nothing. I was completely alone. But when I looked down at a puddle near my feet, he was there. Closer now. Maybe 5 feet behind me in the reflection. I could see more detail. The coat was dark brown or black, heavy wool. His face was in shadow, but I could tell he was tall, thin. I started walking back toward the truck stop, fast, then running. I didn't look at anything reflective, kept my eyes on the ground, on the snow, but I could feel it, that weight of being watched, being followed. When I got back to my truck, I climbed in and locked the doors, sat there breathing hard, trying to calm down. I told myself I was exhausted, that the blizzard and the dark and the empty town had gotten into my head. I'd driven too long, that was all. But I made the mistake of checking my side mirror. He was standing right next to my driver's side door. In the reflection, I mean. Close enough that I should have bumped into him climbing in. Close enough that I could see his face now. I can't describe it properly. I've tried. It wasn't that it was scary or deformed or anything like that. It was more that it wasn't quite right. The proportions were off. The features didn't sit on the face the way they should, like someone had drawn a person without ever seeing one. I looked out my actual window. Nothing there, just snow and empty parking lot. Side mirror. He was still there, standing inches from my door. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my cab with the engine running for heat, staring straight ahead, refusing to look at any mirrors or windows. Around 4 a.m., the snow stopped. By 6, the highway patrol reopened the interstate. I got out of there as soon as I could. Didn't see him again after I left Ridgeway, but here's what I can't stop thinking about. Before I drove away, I checked my logbook on the passenger seat. I keep it on this clipboard with a chrome backing, and in that chrome, in the reflection, I saw him one more time. He was sitting in my passenger seat. I haven't driven that route since. I take the long way around now, even if it adds 3 hours. And I had all the mirrors in my apartment replaced with those non-reflective security ones they use in psychiatric wards. The kind that don't show true reflections, just shadows. I tell people it's because I don't like looking at myself in the morning. That gets a laugh.